Good evening, everyone. Good morning. This is Dr. SHIVA. We're going to be having an interview with Justice, and we're going to really talk about this interesting but very relevant topic about Elon Musk and Netanyahu. The reality is both of them hate free speech, having been at the center of the entire censorship portal discovery of the backdoor portal into Twitter. I know for a fact that Elon Musk has nothing to do with free speech. It's essentially set up to make people think social media platforms under his leadership, particularly Twitter or X, are platforms for free speech. They're actually in a very much more insidious form of free speech. And that's what we're going to be talking about today in my interview. And before we begin, let me just share with you our opening. Discussion about what's going on university campuses and the fact that Elon Musk and Netanyahu are both individuals who hate free speech. You're going to get my systems analysis of it. So let's go right into it. And I'm going to go right into Zoom, and Trey's going to take over in this production. So Trey, you'll have me in the window, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's bring it up like in that format. Let's say. You're going to share, Trey? Oh, you're going to share the Zoom. Okay, I don't know if you're right.
We're on the stage now.
All right, good. So I'm in the Zoom, and I'm going to leave. Okay.
Realize hilarious. Hey, Dr. Shiva. Oh, there he is. We got him.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, sir.
Yeah,
how are you?
Make sure you share it in, side by side mode. Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, doctor. So we're already live. I'm gonna fix up our display real quick.
You want to be? Yeah, I think. Yeah. Hold on one second. Let me tell Trey that when he's transmitting on our end here. Hold on. 1 second.
All right. Oh, you live streaming as well?
Yeah. Trey, you want to make sure that you're not in the Zoom, okay?
It's okay. I took him out of the view. So
okay, great.
You can hide non-video participants.
Okay.
All right. So Dr. Shiva, Ayurveda, am I getting that right?
Nope, you got it completely wrong. It's Shiva Ayyadurai.
Ayyadurai. It's Tamil. Is that right?
The origin is Tamil, yeah.
Is that where you're from?
Yep. Well, I'm originally from Tamil Nadu. Well, I'm originally from Bombay, India.
Okay. My dad's from Kerala. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
well, that used to be all part of Tamil Nadu centuries ago.
Really? I don't know the history at all. I'd be pretty interested in hearing it. Maybe now's not the time, but I definitely would be fascinated in hearing that. Yeah, Tamil Nadu. I've actually been there once. I've been to the tea plantations, kind of there on the border. Beautiful part of the country. How long ago since you lived there?
I've been in the United States since 1970.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you and my father have very similar kind of I think experiences probably coming here. Along. All right. So I'm in Maryland, and you're in Boston, correct?
Yeah.
I spent some time there. I lived in Beacon Hill for 3 years, about 8 years ago. I understand that you're on the MIT side of the river, probably Somerville.
No, I live on the Cambridge side over in Belmont.
Okay, cool. Well, it's such a pleasure to meet you. I'm kind of fascinated. I discovered you during the pandemic. We were on the same side about the vaccine question, and then I've been doing this show now for a couple of years, and one of the fans was in my inbox saying, "You gotta have Dr. Shiva on." And so as when we finally got to schedule this, and I started doing research, the more research I did, the more research I realized I had to do. And so I'll be frank, I feel like I'm like ill prepared because you've got an extremely deep resume, and you're running for president. So I guess we'll start there. You're running for president. Probably most of my audience are Trump voters. What's your pitch?
Well, the reality is, Trump voters are caught in an unfortunate situation because they've been bamboozled by Trump. I've met with Trump multiple times. Trump knows me quite well. I was the one who did all the work on the election audit, because when my election was stolen in Massachusetts, I was the one who did the fundamental stuff that was going viral all over the internet, Michigan analysis, Arizona, because my own election was stolen. And the reality is Trump is a con man, and many of us were conned by him. And people who are following him are unfortunately not capable of letting go, even in the midst of all these contradictions, because it's like an abuse victim. You say abuse victims put up with contradictions. So think about a woman whose husband comes and abuses her constantly, and he's an alcoholic, but once in a while he brings some chocolate and some flowers. So you use those situations, say, well, he did some nice things. He says some nice things. And you have to really look at the arc of Trump's history, because if anyone knows him well, it's me, because I was the one who helped him make sure that he raised $500 million off of my work, which is on all the election fraud stuff. It was Mark Meadows who called me in the middle of this. Ronna McDaniel's office called me. Trump has, heralded me at many, many events, saying Dr.SHIVA, the great computer scientist, is the one who exposed the election fraud. So, and furthermore, I just didn't wear a MAGA hat. I put up thousands of signs for him. So you have a lot of people who just want to look for a savior, but they don't want to use their fucking brains. And the reality is people need to start using their brains and need to recognize politics. And they really need to understand the systems dynamic of politics. Now, I've been a student of politics since I was around 4 years old. This is not something that's a grift for me.
Did you say 4 or 40?
4, okay? Because I grew up in India, which had a caste system. And the caste system in India is quite pernicious. It is no different than Zionism. Brahmanism is equal to Zionism, which is equal to Nazism. So
I did want to quickly define that, because on your town hall yesterday you threw out a definition, and maybe you could do a quick definition on Zionism, because it sounds like what you're saying, Zionism is Jewish supremacy.
No, I didn't say that. You said that. Zionism is racism in the service of imperialism. Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. It is a manufactured political ideology created by Theodore Herzl. And look, when I was 17, 18, I ran one of the biggest protests against a guy called Mir Kahana, who came to Brandeis. And you have to really, really unravel all this. And people of your generation are starting to understand this is why there's all these protests going on in universities. But there's a whole strata of people, the magatards, who don't want to study this. On the one hand, they claim that they're for free speech. But on the other hand, they're supporting the attack on free speech on campuses. Trump, Biden, Booby fucking Kennedy, all are Zionist cocksuckers. That's who they are. Because without Zionism, without sucking Zionist cock, they would have no chance to even be in any type of limelight. You see, every US president is owned by Zionism. Now, what is Zionism? Zionism was a political ideology manufactured out of thin air by a guy called Theodore Herzl, who himself was an atheist, actually. He met a guy called Martin Heckler, who had come up with a completely fictitious view of Christianity, which was based on what's called an eschatological view of Christianity around the 1800s. And these two characters met. And this was very, very opportune for British and U.S. imperialism.
Herzl met who is the other guy? Not Herzl.
Martin Heckler. You can look him up, Hechler. But you have to do your analysis on this. But the bottom line is, Herzl, you have to go back to the conditions of what was going on in Europe. Jews were essentially in Europe, they were citizens of Europe. They were white Europeans who had lived there almost 300 years. That was their land. And in the early 1900s, late 1800s, particularly in the early 1900s, as fascism was starting to rise up in Germany, many working class Jews were heavily involved in building up workers' movements, anti-fascist movements against Hitler, who, by the way, was supported by the United States, was supported by some of the biggest oligarchs in Europe. Why? because according to all historical developments, there was going to be a massive workers' movement in Germany. Germany had, from a working standpoint, some of the most advanced industrial sectors of Germany. So people from all academic circles, all political circles, had always envisioned there was going to be a massive revolution in Germany. So many Jewish leaders, very smart Jewish people, were leading many of these workers' movements and trade unions. And this was against the political elite. You see, because if Germany fell, it was going to spread all over Europe and probably come to the United States. So in order to stop that, Hitler was their weapon.
So Dr. Shiva, let me ask you something, because I mean, people who don't know the history well, may not know what you're talking about. But the trade unions,
that's why we're educating them. They need to be,
but they would know them as communists, right?
They would know who as communists.
The trade unionists, the Jews that led them.
Well, the concept of working people uniting existed long before Karl Marx said it. Okay,
of course,
many of the workers. I don't know if you're aware. That 4 workers were shot in the United States in the 1800s for fighting for the 8-hour workday in the United States. Are you aware of that? Hanged. Were you aware of that?
No. I don't
so
know.
Haymarket, 1886 is one of the most important events in American history. 4 American workers were hanged in it was called the Great Upheaval, which has been completely removed from American history books. So in the 1800s, there was, as we were moving from the agricultural, to the industrial era, people were starting to work at 3 or 4 years old in the United States. It was not uncommon for people to work 20-hour days. Yeah. And all of this has been wiped out of history.
Tell me a little bit about how did your ideas develop around this?
Well, let me finish this, Joshua. You're jumping around. It's really important to understand that in the United States, there was a massive movement of workers. Between 1900 to 1970, nearly 250 million Americans took to the streets in 11 million strikes. So, and you can go look that up on your own. Now, most of that started in the 1800s. This has nothing to do with capital C communism being done out of Russia, okay? Or China. You follow? This was bottoms up American working people. The concept of working people wanting to run the means of production has been as old as, thousands of years, not hundreds of thousands of years, okay? Yeah. People wanting liberation. So as those movements grew in the United States, it was in the 1930s that when during the Depression, a gun was literally put to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's head, not a physical gun, but the mass of these protest movements, which have been wiped out of history. Even when I took AP history in high school, we didn't even study this. I had to study this on my own. So what really occurred was, and most of those movements occurred right here in Massachusetts, in Lowell, led by women. Many, many movements because of the horrible working conditions. So those movements heightened in 1930s when the elite said, holy shit, we're going to have a revolution in the United States. So in order to quiet that revolution down, they gave many reforms, significant ones. Social Security, eliminate the 8-hour workday, elimination of child labor, infrastructure. If you look by 1963, 99% of measles was wiped out, long before the measles vaccine came. All of this occurred because of this massive infrastructure that the United States was known for. This is why your parents, my parents, came from India here, because the United States had built this incredible infrastructure. But that infrastructure did not just come about. It was because of these massive workers' movements. Yeah. Now, in 1950, what happened was the left wing and the right wing, Republicans and Democrats, got together. The Republicans started calling all of these movements capital C communism, that they were being controlled out of Russia, which was absolutely not true. The left wing took over all these bottoms-up trade unions. You see, most of the unions in the United States up until then were run by ordinary workers, bottoms up. So the left took over the unions, top down, the mafia, etc. And then the right wing they developed this entire propaganda campaign that this is all run out of Russia and China.
But I just want to ask, because it sounds like you think that that's a good, that the workers taking power and running society would be a good thing.
I think 8 billion people think about that. Those people who don't probably are in the minority.
Well, of course.
It's not me. This is a general sentiment of those people.
You don't like the label communist. That's fine. But you do sound like a small.
Well, no. You have to use these words because you have to go beyond labeling. We're here. People need to start using their brains, because the issue is, do you want to just have a discussion, or we need to go deep into this? The reality is,
that's what I am trying to get. I'm trying to get to basically your political philosophy, which to me is starting to sound like a small d Democrat. Like you believe in the power of the people.
No, you haven't even, we've been on this call for 5 minutes and you're making these assumptions. So let's just have a conversation first of all before you try to label it. Okay, this is what the problem is. The reality is that you have a rich history in the United States of working people organizing independent of any political party, bottoms up. That's the first principle. Yeah. And these movements occurred organically, bottoms up. All right. They weren't imposed top down. There wasn't the GOP and the Republicans running these, or the Democrats. In fact, the Democrats, give you an example, in the 1950s, sorry, in the 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, 7 workers were shot in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, for fighting for the 8-hour workday. What ended up happening was working people in Wisconsin got together and they created their own political party. You know what ended up happening? The Democrats and the Republicans came together and they ran candidates against that. So what you have to understand is those in power do not want to see people like me, everyday working people, coming bottoms up and creating truly independent movements. And you have to really, really understand what I mean by this, not booby fucking Kennedy's bogus independent movement. Guys like me who grew up in working class communities, who happened to be very fortunate to get the education and building these bottoms up movements. And once you understand that central principle, everything else, you won't start labeling all of this stuff and because that's really a very fundamentally stupid way of doing things, because then you get sliced and you can manipulate people. The bottom line is that those in power do not want a plumber, an electrician, a nurse, an engineer meeting in their neighborhoods, organizing bottoms up movements and say, you know what? I'm the one who produces all this value. I should be the one who has the opportunity to determine my future, not some guy who grew up with a silver spoon. Okay. Now, this is a very fundamental view, but these movements came bottoms up. And those bottoms up movements were central to American history, which for, some serious effect of propaganda took place to remove them, rip out those pages from the history books. So think about how unfortunate it is that you didn't even know that 4 American workers were hanged in 1886 fighting for the 8-hour workday. You have to go ask your teachers, why didn't they teach you that? And then the fact is that during 1900 to 1970, there were 11,000 strikes in the United States. So it was during that period, during 1900 to 1970, that you had an explosive growth of the US economy. So the first income quartile, the second, fourth, third, and fourth, the American pie grew in 1940 for everyone. Why? It was because of people fought for their rights and they scared the shit out of the elites. Now, starting in 1970, Justice, what happened was quite interesting. All of these unions were taken over top down. They weren't bottoms up unions, you see? And the Republicans basically said, if you use the word workers unite, you must be a communist. So Reagan came into power in 1980 when I was at MIT. And the first thing he did, if you go read about it, he shut down all the air traffic controllers unions. It's quite extraordinary. So between 1970 till today, you know how many strikes there have been in the United States? About 900. 900. So
way fewer.
1/10, right? So it's been a 10,000% reduction. And there's been mainly 2 million people who've ever struck. So that means you had 1/100th of the number of people striking. And during 1970 till today, there's been socialism for the elites, $47 trillion in wages. And you don't have to believe me on this. You can go read the right-wing Rand report, which, documented this. So what you now have, and during the pandemic, since that's when you heard me, 600 billionaires increased their wealth by $2.3 trillion. Thank you to fucking Trump. Trump was brought in to make sure the white working class was suppressed. So if you really check this out, I'm the one who exposed elections or selections. I'm the one who did all that fundamental work. So if you believe elections are selections, which is what they are, and if you're a quote unquote a MAGA person, you have to apply that equally. You can't suddenly say under this one condition elections weren't selections. You see, Obama was brought in by the elites after the Bush era. Working people in this country were very, very upset. So they found this guy called Obama and they manufactured him, right? No one knew about Obama. He just comes out of nowhere, who's backed by the Pritzker family. Typically, you have to have big money backing one of these guys out of Chicago. So Obama comes into power. What did Obama actually do? He printed $8 trillion in 2 terms. Yeah. And if you remember, Obama said he was going to be the anti-establishment guy who was going to fight for the workers. And
right. Well, that's the Democratic line, right?
What? No, but 60% of MAGA people voted for Obama. Are you aware of that?
Well, I mean, no, I was not aware of that.
Yeah. So 60% of people who voted for Trump voted for Obama.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the important thing here is the elites have a way of watching. They have enough data to know when working people are getting pissed off. So out of thin air, they manufacture these people. So they manufactured Obama.
I guess what I'm trying to what I'd like to find out though is like what there seems to be an implicit assumption here that we would be better off if we were run by based a mass populist movement. Like no doubt, people want.
Well, yeah, I think
people want that. Everybody wants that, right?
What I'm talking about is that. Well, what we were talking about is the data during the period of American history.
So I guess but when I hear these things, I think, wow, I'm sure glad they shut down the trade unions. Like, wow, I'm sure glad the mob didn't get control of the halls of power. To me, the mob seems like bad. I mean, for thousands of years, pretty much every wise person that wrote a book about it thought democracy was a bad thing, and so. Like I guess I'm just trying to figure out, like, why would we?
Well, who are you talking about? The people who want to keep people like me in chains and caste systems? Who are you talking about? You're talking about
like Plato. Like Plato.
Who the fuck cares about Plato? He was an elite. We're talking about. Look, do you know what the caste system is? Right? You said
you're an elite. You have 4 degrees from MIT.
That doesn't make me an elite.
That you have money.
What makes an elite?
In my view, an elite is somebody who is, in the upper echelon of their society. They've got inordinate influence, either, rightfully gained or non-right, like wrongfully gained. Usually, they've got economic power. Usually, they're highly educated. They've got credentials. Credentials are a big thing that make you an elite.
So your definition of elite is someone who has education.
There's a number of factors. I think there's many ways to become an elite.
So your definition of education is anyone who gets educated is an elite.
No, I'm not saying. I'm saying there are many factors. Credentials are one of them.
But what you just said, think about what you're saying. You're saying that because I went to MIT, it makes you an elite.
Among other things. Yeah,
the issue is who has economic power.
Okay. Yeah, so
who has economic power? So the issue who has economic power? Who has the ability to move vast amounts of capital to determine the course of human history? You don't, I don't, the average plumber or electrician doesn't. You know who has vast amounts of economic power? It's about 600, 700 people.
Yep.
Who have the ability to move the world economy is around $600 trillion. Who has the ability to move capital? And if you watch the Swarm video, you'll understand it's a finite set of people who can, and they're an interconnected set of people. It's not like the Rothschilds.
Right.
It's not any one individual, but it's a class of people. And
I was hoping you would talk about this swarm concept and maybe define it for people who haven't watched your videos yet.
Yeah, I don't want to jump around. I want to say on it because you're just jumping around everywhere. It's not a good way to educate people. And the bottom line is let's focus on the fact that.
Well, Dr. Shiva, to be fair, if I let you run the interview, then I wouldn't be much of an interviewer, would I?
Well, you're jumping around everywhere. It's not really serving anyone to really understand. The bottom line is that my run for president is very, very different because you started out with Trump. Okay, so we're going on that line. Trump.
I was just giving you some idea of what the audience might, be.
Yeah. So if you go back to Trump, and the background on this is that 60% of people who voted for Trump voted for Obama. Okay, and the working people in this country have been bamboozled at a very fundamental level because those in power have incredible amounts of data, and they can see the sentiment of people. Now with social media, you can do it even faster. So at the time of Obama, people knew people were breaking with this system. So they created Obama, and Obama was able to 8 years keep stability among the working people. But at the end of the day, in 2008, when the banks failed, who bailed them out? It was Barack Obama, right? In the midnight hour, they printed about $8 trillion. So after that period, Justice, the white working class in this country was quite distraught. And there's enough data on that. So they needed a hero. Trump was created for that purpose. And Trump comes in, and what does he do? Now, he came in on lock her up, if you remember that slogan. A lot of people have forgotten that, right? Drain the swamp and build the wall, none of which he executed. Hillary was not locked up 24 hours after he came into office. He said, well, that was for the election. Now we move on. And you can go look at the video where he says that openly. Right? Do you remember that?
I do.
So lock her up.
It just happened, right?
What's that?
He just commented on it like a couple of days ago.
Yeah, so there's a video we did called Was Trump the Swamp? The second thing he did was he brought in the swamp. You look at all the characters he brought in, Pompeo, Bolton, these people are as deep state as you can get. And then the quote unquote MAGA people are like, oh, well, he had to do that. He's playing ninth dimensional chess. He's such a smart guy, da. What people don't understand is that Trump is a fake businessman. He's never really run any business. He got all of his money from his father. If he had simply used his money and not done anything, he should have had 3 times the wealth because of the value of real estate going up. He's a fake businessman. He went bankrupt multiple times. The second time he went bankrupt, Wilbur Ross is the one who saved him. Wilbur Ross was the head of equity for the Rothschild Inc.
So Dr. Shiva, I hate to interrupt you again, but the initial question was, what is your pitch to these voters? Like, what is your platform?
Well, I'm not going to give you a one-liner, okay? That's not what I do.
But you must have issues. You must have
initiatives,
a program.
So the distinguishing feature is the following. The distinguishing feature in this is that Trump was set up by the establishment. So me being in the center of all this, having communicated with Trump, you're looking at someone who actually saw all of this. And it took me a lot to break from Trump. We lost 20% of our followers. So the fundamental issue here is that the establishment knows that the working people in this country are getting shafted. And they're they're thinking someone's going to come from above. So my running for president gives people the first opportunity in a very long time for someone coming from below. And now we've created a movement that's global as well as in the United States. We've gotten on the ballot in 2 states, Utah and Idaho. Kennedy couldn't even get on the ballot in Idaho. He had to go do a backroom deal. He couldn't even get 1,000 signatures. Yeah. So if you look at our movement, everyone in our movement, no one gets paid. It's all working people, engineers, plumbers, electricians, who literally go on the ground and collect signatures. So the single line of our campaign is, this is a movement by the people, for the people, period. And when you have a movement like that, every aspect of policy that we look at comes from we the people. So let's take foreign policy. Number one, well, the United States foreign policy has been dictated out of Israel, Netanyahu, etc. Right. As you know, 95% of politicians in Congress are funded by AIPAC, which is a Zionist lobby. Every president on the United States has to suck Zionist cock. And I use that terms with to just manifest to people how disgusting this is. So if you notice, Booby Kennedy sucks Zionist cock, Biden sucks Zionist cock, Trump sucks Zionist cock, and they have the audacity, Trump, to say, make America great again. If you read the work of James Borfman, it clearly shows that it was Israel that put Trump into power. Yeah. So the American working people are being shafted by Trump. Look, I don't know if you met with Trump. I've met with him twice, okay? Very long conversations. He was very, very apologetic to me. Yeah. that he supported a guy in Massachusetts who did the election fraud. Trump is all pay to play. So what's happened is the elites know that working people are breaking away from the establishment. So they have to create these fictitious characters who say all the right things to keep people stuck to the swarm. That's what's really going on. So what is the swarm? You asked that. The swarm is not one particular person. You see, a lot of these America First, frankly, I think they're racist. They try to attack Jews. You see, they try to say the Rothschilds are the problem. You say they try to pinpoint it on one particular race, or they try to say some reptiles are doing it. You see these people on, like David Icke and so on, right? So they try to mislead people. The reality is it's a little more sophisticated than that. The swarm is a network set of a multiracial aristocracy of people who go beyond geographic boundaries, and they even may have contradictions among themselves, but at the end of the day, they work together to make sure that there's never a bottoms-up movement. And that's the central thesis. So this swarm includes the top 100 university professors, includes prime ministers, advisors, influencers, the heads of companies, media people. It's not just any one person, right? So if you try to target any one person, it's not the right way to look at it. It's sort of a grouping of people, sort of a club, and sometimes they may even have contradictions. Like think about it as organized criminals. So sometimes one organized thug may have a contradiction against another guy, right? Because he wants more property. But ultimately, they all work against the 8 billion of us. That's the swarm. And if people go to shattertheswarm.com, there's a 15-minute video that's there that took me about 50 years to actually do. And it's very deep because you'll learn a lot. There are people who watch it, 20, 30 times. But the front face of the swarm are the politicians. That's who we see. We're basically their puppets. One wing of the swarm, who represents to the outward face, are the obvious establishment, the Clintons, the Bushes, right? They are the obvious ones who want to subjugate us. And that's easy to see. But since 1970, the establishment has gotten very clever. They built a lot of these institutions like the Kennedy School of Government, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy.
What happened in 1970?
What's that?
Or I guess why is 1970 significant, or why?
1970s, it's a good question. It's a very good question. 1970 is very significant because 1970 was really the turning point in American history. It was when consolidation of power, centralization took place at many levels. The Department of Education comes into being in 1970, right, which destroyed the educational system in this country. In 1970 is when the National Institute of Health, the NSF, these institutions took massive power. They were put under the executive branch. That's where Fauci came out of, okay? You had the consolidation of big pharma, big hospitals, and insurance companies. And that's where you have the fucked up healthcare system as we have today, okay? So a number of very significant things took place in the 70s, which was when the elites realized they needed to really consolidate power. It was in 1962, under the Kennedy administration, they signed the Kennedy Vaccination Act, which created the CDC's organization to promote vaccine mandates. By 1986, with all of that work done, Ted Kennedy, John Kennedy's younger brother, is the one who created the vaccine injury program to protect big pharma. But it was 1970 was the inflection point when the elites really started consolidating power. That's when, between 1970 till today, you start seeing this. And if you remember, 1970s when we got off the gold standard and we went to the petrodollar. Okay.
I was wondering if you were going to mention it.
Yeah. So you have some significant events that took place in 1970. And if you look
just,
at
the gold standard, are you for or against?
Well, nowadays it doesn't matter because they can even manipulate the gold standard. Okay. They have a group. Remember when the Israel bombings were taking place, gold was about to skyrocket and they controlled it. Okay. The situation is, Justice, that any of these things can be controlled now. So people saying, oh, invest in precious metals, invest in this, invest in that. They're forgetting that these systems are controlled by a finite set of people. They can control even gold, which you just saw happen 2-3 weeks ago. Okay, they have a group, as you know, called. Are you familiar with the group that they have? An organization that actually can control the plunge of any type of commodity. All right, there's an
No,
actual.
never.
Yeah, so there's an actual. Let me bring up the. I want to get the exact name of it, but it's plunge. Okay, here we go. So bring it up here.
By the way,
Yeah.
while you're pulling that up, I'll just
So it's called the plunge protection team. Okay.
Plunge protection team.
Yeah. So that's the name of it. So gold, was going to explosively, was at 2360, right? And then when the plunge protection team came in, they stabilized it at 2430.
Working group on
So
international markets.
yeah, so look it up, plunge protection team. So Biden called them out, right? Because when Iran went into Israel and Israel bombed back, they thought gold was going to explosively grow. Because obviously, if gold grows, the dollar plunges even greater, right? So we have to recognize that the swarm is very, very clever, and to think that there's going to be some, panacea, right? Oh, invest in gold, invest in this, invest in that, right? Is going to save us. If anything, you should follow a good financial advisor and realize that if anything you should do is to diversify, okay? Because that's the ultimate protection. But what the United States dollar is backed up by today is neither gold nor petroleum. It's backed by F-15s, and it's backed by aircraft carriers, and it's backed by the power of the U.S. presence in the Middle East, Allah through Israel. That's what actually supports the U.S. dollar. Yeah. This is why, that professor at University of Pennsylvania, who has now become the chief theorist of what's called modern monetary theory, MMT, says that it's fine to print money. You should print as much money as you want. And she's really been the theoretician behind Obama as well as Trump, as well as every president now. So the idea is they don't care about what is backing the United States dollar. The theory is print money at will, as long as the United States is a reserve currency. Now, how does the United States maintain its position as a reserve currency? Well, F-15s, Israel, and having massive amounts of aircraft carriers, you see? So that's why the US can be the reserve currency. And to a lot of people who mistakenly say, oh my God, the dollar is going to crash. Well, they're actually not telling you the truth, because the dollar keeps getting stronger because it has become the currency of the global elites. In India, for example, the elites in India are buying dollars. All right. So to have this view that the dollar is going to crash suddenly tomorrow is not what the data actually shows. The data is actually showing that the elites continue to bolster the dollar. As long as the United States military can execute what it does, and this is why Israel is central to the U.S. Hegemony, they can print as much money as they want. I'm not supporting that, right? But I'm saying that's where this comes from. So it's called MMT. We're not running on any type of real economics anymore. We're running on modern monetary theory. Like a very good friend of mine runs one of the biggest banks in the world, okay? And he was saying, I said, what's going on? And he said, you know what? I don't even know. He goes, we're in a world now of modern monetary theory. So it's all based on the U.S. being the reserve currency.
So one, let me, because I want to, first of all, I want to check you on time. How are you doing? Because I know we had a schedule.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about policy, because I think that's what you want to talk about, right?
I want to talk about your policy proposals. I want to talk about like you personally and your ideas, and how you formed them. I'd really like to know who your influences were, who you think here's a good question for you. What do you think the best book in the last 1,000 years is?
Well, there are a number of good ones. I think if people really want to understand, the state of what's, some of these are not books. There was a great pamphlet written many, many years ago called Zionism is Racism in the Service of Imperialism. Another great book by Ramakrishna Mukherjee is The Rise and Fall of the East India Company. Okay. It's a great book which really traverses the entire history of India and British colonialism all the way up to the 1757. That's, you can, there's only one copy of it, I know, at Harvard Widener Library. That's a very good book to read, One of the books I'd recommend is that book right up there, System and Revolution. And that book really helps people really understand what is a system and what is a revolution, because the word revolution has various connotations. So my work has been really to figure out what is a system. I grew up in a caste system in India. I've been doing lots of research on medical systems, right? Political systems.
Are you a Hindu?
I don't even know what that means. What is your definition of Hindu?
I mean, do you practice religion? Do you believe?
Well, what is Hindu?
And...
Well, Hindu is a term that was given by the British.
Well, yeah, I mean,
people in this,
do you want? I mean, I'm asking you because if I told you my definition, you'd probably you would not like it. So.
Yes, I don't know what that means, because Hinduism is the people of the Indus Valley,
Right.
Indus, that's what it means. So,
but I mean, do you believe in the Gitas? Do you take them seriously? Do you have a shrine in your home? Do you worship deities that they worship?
Well, I think I don't know. I don't know what your question means by that, but
well, like I have friends that practice Hinduism and they have shrines in their home and they believe in the things that the Gita say.
If the definition of a shrine in my home, no, I don't. What I believe is that information, matter, and energy move through each other, and there's a lot of research stuff that we don't even know. The other piece I know is that the India, as we know it today, has gone through many, many different iterations. There was a time when the people of India were very closely connected to the earth, the time of what was called Siddhars and the Dravidian people, which went from South India all the way to North India. And they believed in the connection to the earth. It's old Dravidian culture. When the Aryan invasion took place around 2,000 years ago, that perturbed a lot of this understanding. And then you had British colonialism take place. But the rishis and the sages of India were really scientists, if you study it very carefully. And they believed in the scientific method. And they had also uncovered some very, very important truths that were embodied in a system of medicine called Siddha and something called yoga, which was not just doing postures. So, my grandmother was a traditional healer and I saw her, and if you're from Kerala, you'll know that there's lots of Ayurvedic centers all over Kerala.
All over. Yeah.
So these ancient systems of medicine and yoga were a scientific tradition that were practiced for thousands of years. And they had multiple systems. They involved martial arts, they involved meditation, they involved the use of heavy metals, herbs, and spiritual enlightenment, right? They were all united. About 300-400 years ago, after the British colonialism came in, these systems were completely destroyed, and Indians started practicing allopathic medicine. In fact, they were embarrassed to even talk about their yoga systems, you see? Now, my journey growing up in India, I saw my grandmother use these systems to, I saw her heal people. So that led my journey. So I grew up in this India in two worlds, where my great-grandfather was an indentured servant. He went to Burma as a 12-year-old on a slave ship. And I knew him, so I had that experience of him and the caste system, which I experienced even in Bombay growing up, which was quite abusive. Yeah. And then I also saw this woman who had no degrees, who could do quite extraordinary things, practicing this ancient system of medicine, a completely different medical system. So I was moved by both of these things. When I came to to the United States in 1970, I grew up in working class neighborhoods in Patterson, Clifton, New Jersey. And so I was moved to want to work very hard. By the time I was 14, I was working in a medical school as a full-time research fellow. But I wasn't just a nerd. I was a star baseball player. I was on a Division I soccer team, a center halfback. So I was brought up to do all sorts of things, and I did a lot of landscaping. My mentors in the United States were plumbers and electricians. And
I was going to ask. Who
Yeah.
who do you consider like your most influential mentor?
Well, I would say it was my great grandfather in India, my grandmother in the United States. It was, a guy who taught me how to landscape. Another guy who taught me how to do carpentry. So I was always doing a lot of labor work while doing software engineering, believe it or not, at this medical school and doing research. So you can't bucket me, and this is a problem that people have because they try to bucket people.
Yeah.
So my
Well,
influential people are
I mean, do
hard
you
work.
mind if I reflect on a little bit of what you said? Because first of all, you're Indian, and I think you'll confirm this, that Eastern philosophies are very different from Western philosophies. I mean,
Actually,
even
it's
what you
not true. So it's not true. So what I
not true.
uncovered was the ancient systems of Indian medicine and yoga match one-to-one with engineering system science. So here's the deal. So the ancient systems, yoga and medicine, they have a whole language, okay, that they speak in. So when my grandmother looked at you, she would try to figure out your body's constitution. And she would say your vata, pitta, or kapha. So if you talk to your parents in Kerala, or if you go there, the Ayurveda does the same thing. So they look at a person, they try to characterize their body's constitution. That's the first thing. So when Westerners hear this, they say, oh, this sounds like a bunch of snake oil. This is weird shit, right? Vata, pitta, kapha. Well, it turns out my research in 2007, when I did my Fulbright after finishing my PhD, I went back to India and I studied this. It turns out those three very foundational words, which are used to describe a human being, are directly related in engineering science to general systems theory to transport, conversion, storage. I'm not going to get into the details of all this, but the bottom line is the ancient yogis and rishis of India had come to the conclusion the body is a complex system. You can't reduce it to genes and proteins and mRNA. This was dumb. So they created a very different way of looking at the body. And I uncovered that the language that they were using matched one-to-one to engineering system science. And that's what's in System and Revolution. So when I came back from India after I did my Fulbright for 2 years, I taught a course at MIT, an elective, which was the most well-attended elective in the entire institute. Who would come to this? We had MDs, engineers, scientists, plus yoga teachers, chiropractors. So it was this unifying course, which really had, what I had discovered was the missing link between engineering system science and Indian. It's not even philosophy. Most of the Gita, for example, that you brought up, was really a propaganda novel, and I'm going to piss off a lot of Hindus. The Gita was really promoting the caste system, okay? And we can do a whole video on that. But the bottom line is that the way that the ancients looked at the body matches one-to-one with how engineers look at physical systems. So that's what I'd uncovered, you see, in 2007. And because of my interest in politics, I realized that these same principles could be applied to political change. So for the last 1,000 years, the people who looked at the world and studied politics were philosophers, right? Or lawyers or scientists. You mentioned Plato or Socrates or John Locke or Lenin or Marx, right? These guys were philosophers. They didn't have an engineering systems approach to understand systems. And that's what I've uncovered. And using this very foundational, grounded view, we can start understanding your body as a system using these same principles, Justice. You can understand political systems, all these systems. And
So
that is,
I guess what I'm wondering though is why, if the ancient Indians had the equivalent of the scientific method, why did they not have the equivalent of the scientific revolution?
they did have a scientific revolution. The difference was they weren't vigilant, okay?
They weren't vigilant. Okay.
They weren't vigilant because what happened was once you become a quote unquote an advanced society in some levels, okay, you think everyone is kind, everyone is nice, okay? The brutality of colonialism was never expected. And that's what happens. You see, so if you become, you can watch some of these movies, right? These aliens come from another world. They're so kind and peaceful, etc. Right?
Do you think that's what's happening to us now?
What do you mean?
Like we're so nice we don't know that we're being colonized by Zionists?
Well, what's happened to the United States has been a process, right? The United States was really a capitalist revolution. 1776 was not a workers' revolution by any means, right? It was a merchant class overthrowing the feudal class.
This
So
is
since
true.
that, since that
People
point,
don't know that. Yeah.
right? But since there were many advances that came from that.
Right.
But capitalism as a whole is not a trajectory that just is linear, right? It's not just flat. It's not like capitalism is capitalism in its vibrant stage that it was in the 1800s, right? Early 1900s. It's now become state capitalism, like in China, right? It's become crony capitalism. It's become imperialism, right? So you don't really have great innovation anymore. The capitalist interest has been to maximize power, profit, control. So that's where it's become. So as a part of that, you have monopolies, and you need to expand markets. And to expand markets, you need military might. So Zionism serves that interest.
How do you come to moral conclusions?
How do I come to moral conclusions?
Yeah.
What do you mean? How do I come to moral conclusions?
I mean, because everything we've discussed so far, you seem to believe in an engineering approach to things, a scientific approach to things. I've heard, an economic lens through which you view power. How do you decide right and wrong?
Well, you seem to think there's that you have to separate science and spirituality. These things are actually unified. You see the difference. What's that?
Tell me about it.
Well, so you have to go back to 1600 when Newton discovered the laws of motion. On that same day, the separation of science and religion took place. Why? So what did Newton fundamentally propose? He said, look, I have these 3 laws of motion, and with these laws and with this mathematics, I can predict the motion of every particle, right? Mm-hmm. So I could predict where the sun is going to be in the future, where the earth is going to be, as well as where it was. So what does that mean? That means the universe is a clock. Everything can be predicted, right? Because you have these laws of motion. This was seriously unfortunate or the religious people saw this as sacrilege, right? They said, oh my God, if everything is so predictable and we live in a clockwork, then what is the purpose of God, right? Because the notion of God is you pray, the individual has a direct connection with their creator, you can have miracles take place. But Newtonian mechanics says everything's predictable, right? The sun is always going to go like this. The earth is, you can predict everything. So this was a mechanistic view of the universe. So it was on that day, in the mid 1600s, when Newton gave his famous lectures on Principia. On that same day is when you had religion getting even more emboldened, thinking, wait a minute, this is going against our worldview. So since that point till today, we've had a mechanistic view of the universe up until around 1957, when system science came to be. This mechanistic view of the universe basically says that if I gather enough data, I can predict the motion of anything. I can predict you. I can create robots, automatons. Ooh, isn't this universe a simulation, right? You've heard people say that.
Right.
So the mechanistic view of the world leads to the ultimate dead-end state, or to the view that I can control everything, because everything is mechanical, right?
Exactly.
And that's where we're living right now. It's a very fucked up view of the world, and it has created no room for spirituality, you see? But the reality that emerged in the 1920s to 1950, when we really started understanding general system science was that Newtonian mechanics was contradicted by the laws of thermodynamics, which said everything goes to disorder, right? The second law of thermodynamics, everything goes to high entropy.
Right.
So this was a irresolution, because wait a minute, Newton's saying everything is ordered, I can predict everything, and the law of thermodynamics says everything goes to disorder. You following me?
Yes.
So it was not until the work of Ilya Prigogine in 1957 this was resolved, and he doesn't get any credit for this. And so my work begins from that standpoint. Okay. So what we find is the reality is this mechanistic world we see actually comes out of the original state of the universe, which is actually quite in a mode of what you would call chaos. And under certain conditions, order emerges. So what comes out of that to me is that information, matter, and energy are constantly moving. And there's something that emerges out of this is a power of consciousness. Your state of consciousness, my state of consciousness can affect things anywhere in the universe. So to me, this is a deeply spiritual thing. So when I talk
this
about,
Prigioni fellow, he basically invented like chaos theory
well, he didn't,
and
no, he didn't invent chaos theory.
complex systems.
Well, complex system stuff goes before him, work of Claude
Okay.
Shannon, cybernetics. But what Prigioni showed in a very interesting experiment that he observed was out of randomness, order would come. Okay? So there's a very interesting experiment called the chemical clock. You know, you should have randomness, but for some reason, beautiful order would emerge at certain times. Okay?
Yeah.
So what this reveals is that you've heard of the 100 monkey effect, right? One monkey in one part of the island learns how to crack a coconut, and the monkey all the way on another side of the world learns how to do it. No one knows. There's something quite fascinating, and I wish I had more time to research this. It seems that particles in the universe communicate, even though they may be separated by vast distances.
Right.
And we don't know how this actually occurs. This is one of the fundamental issues in science. But now this also occurs to individuals, because you as an individual are experiencing information, matter, and energy. Your thoughts are information, right? Putting stuff together, matter and energy. So you're raising your consciousness, you're seeing certain phenomenon that others don't see, believe it or not, is going to influence people's behavior at another part of the universe. And just like a particle, when it starts to move directionally in some ways, it affects something else. Now, we don't know how all this works. So the reality is this is actually quite profound. And that's where system science is quite revealing, because it actually unites what you may call spirituality and science. So the reality is that, you know, if you just follow the mechanistic view of pure science or engineering, you end up to the state of basically creating robots, right? Or chat GPTing everyone. And that's where we're headed, that mechanistic view. The elites want to gather enough data on you and me, and they want to take the approach that, oh, I could basically gather enough data on justice, let's say on your viewers and all your social network, and I know exactly what you will eat tomorrow, right? And I know exactly what you will buy tomorrow, because you're an automaton. You see, that's what emerges out of that. But the truth is, some people may choose to be automatons, and others may choose to radically change their consciousness. Now, you may call this spirituality. To me, this is the flow of information, matter, and energy, and something called consciousness. So the movement that we've created, Truth, Freedom,
I guess
Health.
I'm trying, because what it sounds like to me is that you're kind of you're saying that spirituality is a sort of component within the material universe.
No, I'm saying you shouldn't be separating them. You can't separate them. Information, matter, and energy flow between each other. For far too long, we've created this stupid dialectic, right? Oh, you know, that's a very, you know, the woo-woo people do this. Oh, I'm very spiritual. You know, they've separated the material world from the spiritual world. This is sort of a false dichotomy. It's like separating thought from action. You see?
Right.
These things are flowing between each other, and we don't know enough of the mechanics of how that happens. You know, how one particle over here influences another, or you raising your consciousness and understanding affects something else. You know, some people call it a zeitgeist at a time in history, right? But it's clear that there's a movement of consciousness that occurs. And I think the issue is, does consciousness reside independent of the physical body, right? This is one of these very interesting questions.
Yeah.
But I think when you take a systems approach, and you really take a systems approach, which is what the great rishis did. So if you go read the ancient Vedas, they're not that different than engineering, but they don't separate this. So it's been the Western philosophy, and that has actually created this stupid dialectic. There is no separation between science and religion. In fact, I don't know if you know it, Newton did more work on mysticism than he did on physics.
Yeah. He was a big alchemy nerd. Do you believe in God?
Well, if you believe God, it depends on what you define God as truth, love, right? The manifestation of compassion, right? I do. And do I believe certain beings were the reflection of that? Definitely. And do I believe that a human being can be a co-creator with God? Definitely. Yeah.
You
It
believe
depends on your definition, but I don't believe in some white man sitting on some throne somewhere.
do you
You
believe
know,
that we're made in the image of God?
well, you have to define what these mean, right? If you believe we're made in the ability to have great truth, great compassion, great love, that's true. I believe that. Now, there is when you talk about physically heaven and physically earth, these kinds of things, as Christ talked about, I don't believe he was talking about physical places. I believe he was talking about states of consciousness,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And I always ask Christians this. Okay, I'll go to them and say, okay, heaven is a place, right? They go, oh yeah, it's a beautiful place. It's paradise. It's where we go after the rapture and all that, right? I go, okay, so it's a place that's absolutely pure, perfected place. Yes. So beings in heaven do not have evil thoughts, right? They're pure human beings. Yes, of course, right? Then I say, okay, if that's true, then what the fuck happened to Lucifer? Why does Lucifer want to overthrow God? Where did that thought come in, that evil thought?
Hmm.
And then they say, oh, well, he also has choice. So there you go. That means it's about consciousness. So you can go as high as you
Well,
want.
yeah, but that's like the least sophisticated Christian version of it. Like,
But no one can answer that contradiction. If heaven is such a pure place, why did Lucifer want to overthrow God when he's sitting in heaven and he's his archangel?
well, I think one orthodox or view of this is that God is allowing it for a greater purpose, which is all
Yeah,
things
I
work
know,
together.
but what I'm saying is, if you go under the assumption heaven is the ultimate place of perfection, right?
Yeah, the place thing that I mean, there's plenty of disagreement on this in the Christian church, but like even in the Western church,
Yeah. So what I'm saying is the logical conclusion that I have is it's consciousness. So when you're in a state of consciousness, you
that's
can go high
consciousness.
or low. You can be the most angelic being, and tomorrow you could go down to becoming a devil.
Hmm.
So nothing is guaranteed.
How do you contend with the resurrection of Christ?
Well, this is a longer question. Okay, we should have a whole discussion on this.
I would
Okay.
love to. Yeah, I mean, honestly,
Yeah,
I'm
we should have a
fascinated by so
longer
much of what we're
discussion
talking
on
about,
this
and
because
I would actually love to sit down. If we could, if you ever have the time, if you're willing, I'd fly up to Boston. I'd get us a studio. I'd love to
we
sit
could
down
do
for
a
like a
whole thing on
3 hour.
Christ, but I've studied the life of Christ probably in so many different ways. But it's a longer discussion.
But the
But
resurrection, I mean, is a historical event. Like either you believe that it happened, or
well,
you believe that
there's some
it's
very good
fiction.
books. There's some really, really very sharp theologians.
Mhm.
PhDs in the field. Divinity, who've done some extraordinary work on this. So I don't have the book. I lent the book, but there's a very powerful dissertation that was done on this and many topics on this. So we have to first of all so the way the guy begins the book, he says, understanding the life of Christ is like understanding particle physics, right? You have to intersect a bunch of things.
Hmm.
And so he intersects the work of Josephus, right, which was a Jewish historian of the time.
Right, right.
He plus he had access to many, many Roman letters, and then the Old Testament, right, and the New Testament. So intersecting all these pieces of data, he concludes, yes, there was this being called Christ, right? So that was the first conclusion, right? Was there someone called Christ? Because some people argue there was no Christ. It was a movement. There were many people around that time.
No, there
Probably
was obviously a historical Jesus of
right.
Nazareth. Yeah.
Well, so you started the baseline, right?
Yeah.
And then he goes down this very wonderful path to understand the conditions of that time, right?
Hmm.
The historical conditions that were taking place. And then he goes and discusses the events that occurred with the resurrection, right? And Christ's life. So, but it's a longer discussion. I don't want to talk about it now because it would be.
What's the name of that writer? Do you know offhand?
I don't have it, man. I have to, I'm
Is it
looking on my
NT Wright?
book.
It sounds like
Huh?
NT Wright.
What's that?
It sounds like NT Wright.
No, this was it was like, it's, it was multiple. I mean, these guys are like serious religious scholars, who do their PhDs in divinity, these kinds of people. You're right. They're not,
I think NT Wright's pretty serious. I think he's written like 50
yeah.
books. Yeah.
But anyway,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. So anyway, I don't want to get into that, but because you have to spend enough time on it. It wouldn't be fair to your audience or my audience.
Okay.
I did a video on Easter about 2 years ago. You know, to me, one of the most profound things that many Christians also do not want to discuss is when Christ beat the shit out of the money lenders, and he did
I'll
it.
talk about that all day.
Yeah, but
it's like our favorite part these days.
Yeah, but he did it not just once; he did it multiple times.
He did it twice. He did it the first Passover, and then 3 Passovers later, he did it.
Yeah,
again.
there's evidence that he may have done it more than twice. Okay.
Okay.
But it's obvious, Christ knew, obviously the Romans were problematic, but the Sadducees and the Pharisees, who I call the not so obvious establishment of the time, were the real problems. They spoke the words of God, but they were doing everything antithetical to God. The Sadducees were running sort of like the Costco's and Walmarts of temples,
Right. Yeah.
And when Christ initially, exposed them, the Pharisees, who were running like the 7-Elevens of temples, thought they could ally themselves with Christ, and then Christ also further exposed them. If you look at certain historical timelines from the day he was crucified and you go back, he had done his last temple cleansing. And so the Pharisees and the Sadducees got together. So one of the important lessons is it was not the obvious establishment who knocked off Christ, right? It was the not so obvious establishment. There's many lessons you could take to modern times. I always like to look at what's going on today. You have the obvious establishment, like we talked about, right? That you see openly. Bushes,
the Clintons, the DNC. Yeah.
Okay. Right, etc. But what people and this is where their real issue is on understanding, or have people really looked into it, are the not so obvious establishment. That's what I talk about in the Swarm video. You have the obvious establishment. So open fascism, fuck you, we're going to do this to you, right? But the not so obvious establishment are the people who speak with a sweet tongue, but they stab you in the back.
Right.
And what's happened is the elites have been creating a farm league of these people on the left and the right, to keep people connected to the swarm. So
how do they control them? How do the elites control the farm group?
What's that?
How do the elites control the farm league?
Well, because they're part of them. Okay, they're manufactured by them. Okay, so if you take, for example, Bernie Sanders, take Jesse Jackson on the left. Okay. The left wing has its establishment left wing, the hardcore Democrats, right? You can look at, the Jimmy Carters, the Walter Mondales, right? The Clintons, but the hardcore Democrat cannot exist without the wing. So if you look at the establishment as a swarm, which is, let's say, the head of a bird, it has its shoulders, which are the obvious establishment, the Republican establishment and the Democrat establishment. But this bird cannot fly unless it has its wings, Justice, because the wings are the ones that keep bringing people connected to this swarm. So the left had, the right had, for example, the Tea Party movement, right? Quote unquote libertarians. All right. These people speak words of, some old day gone capitalist form, right? Free market economy, all this kind of stuff, right? The left also has the people like Bernie Sanders, Jesse Jackson, right? Who act like they're speaking for the working people. And this is how they keep people connected, because they just say enough so people don't leave them. So in 1984, you can see how Jesse Jackson, for example, when I was 17, 18 years old, he was promoted to the youth. Oh my God, this guy is anti-establishment. He's going to fight for everyone. This is long before the LBGT movement. He had what was called the Rainbow Movement. He was bringing everyone together. And he was presenting himself as a fighter, right? He would say stuff against the Democrat establishment as an independent. But at the last minute, at the floor of the Democratic Convention, he corrals all these young people, right? People thought he was anti-establishment, and he brings them right in to the Democrats. And he says, wow, at that time it was Reagan running against a guy called Walter Mondale. So
Yeah.
Jesse Jackson's role was to bring all those sheep right into the Democrats. And that's what he did. And the story goes, he got a private plane out of the deal. So many years later, in 2000, when Bernie Sanders was running, if you remember, against Hillary Clinton, many people called me up. They said, oh, Dr. Shiva,
You
you're
mean
anti-establishment.
2016?
2016, right? They said, you should support Bernie. And I said, look, Bernie's going to do exactly what Jesse Jackson did. He's a setup. He works for the Democrats. His job is to take all these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young people on college campuses, get them to work their butts off for him, to keep the Democrats or people not leaving the Democratic Party, giving them hope, right? And then what did he do? He literally brought them back to Hillary Clinton. He hugs Hillary Clinton on the floor of the convention, right? And I predicted that. Well, the right also has those people. That's the purpose of Trump. Trump was created to be the wings of the Republican Party, to keep people entertained. And now the establishment knows, because of our movement, because of the work we've been doing assiduously for the last 4 years, we have educated people on this dialectic of how they have the obvious and the not so obvious establishment in a very powerful way. So they have created teams of these people. Typically, they have one character, Tulsi Gabbard, another total scumbag. Okay.
I was going to ask you.
Yes, she speaks the words of the military-industrial academic, right? Military complex. But she was all out for invading Iraq right after 9/11. She was all out for butchering the Palestinians.
Yeah. So
Vivek the Snake, another scumbag. Okay. They literally went and found a brown guy to mimic my words. So you see this Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, all these people. So you see that the establishment knows that people have figured them out broadly. The awareness has occurred. So they don't want them to take the behavior and then the change, right? ABC. Awakening is one part, and then changing your own behavior to realize you have to build an independent movement. This is what it's all about. The goal is to make sure people do not build independent movements by one of us, someone like me, or people from bottoms up leading them. So it has to be top down, the swarm. So in order to do that, they've created now a farm league of people who, a rainbow of these people. So they have Tulsi Gabbard going to the anti-establishment crowd of the military-industrial complex, booby fucking Kennedy, medical freedom, right? So they have a rainbow of these people who are all going to sucker people right back into the swarm. But we've been hammering at all of them. But one defining characteristic that's really important, that's very valuable, is all these people support Zionism. All of them. So you can now have a litmus test, which we didn't have before. Every single one of them are Zionist cocksuckers. All of them.
I'm going to change the subject a little bit here, but you have a real gift of narrative, and I'm curious who you study to develop your communication skills.
I don't know. It's just me, man.
And your storytelling
like this. There's nothing I've studied. The problem is that when you actually no, I just look. I don't know if you
storytelling and just putting it together.
Well, I grew up around people in New Jersey, hardworking people.
Yeah.
If you've been around everyday people, we talk. People tell their journeys. I have a very good friend of mine, Lorraine, who grew up in Newark. She and I will tell all stories about what it was growing up, and they're great stories because we actually lived life. We didn't live in these little bubbles.
But telling stories that you're personally a part of is different from being able to gather disparate facts and construct a meta narrative about them, and label things well, such that people will remember the labels and sort of the architecture of information that you're creating for them to learn and believe in. There's something like hypnotic about it, and it's extremely powerful. I'm pretty impressed.
Well, Justice, I think the reality is my whole life has been about creating things, making things, with my hands, with my mind, right? Yeah. And when you're an engineer and you have to make stuff, you're constantly connecting things.
Yeah.
And you have to, think about the world that I grew up in. I grew up in a world of so many contradictions that I had to figure out, make sense of all this. I grew up in India, in Bombay, which is like a crazy city. If you've ever been to Bombay, which has 120, different languages. You go out in the world, it's colorful. You see all sorts of wild stuff.
Do your Indian pals get mad when you call it Bombay? Because they correct me and they'll be like Mumbai. I'm like,
yeah, I don't care. It's
I don't
irrelevant.
care.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is, so I grew up in that world in my formative years, and then I used to take a caboose train to the small village, which had no running water. Right.
Yeah.
So imagine being hit with these contradictions.
Yeah.
And then here I see my grandmother have no degrees, and I see her healing people. Then I see medical doctors who don't know shit. Then I see a caste system on one hand, and then I see an Indian philosophical system which talks about equality and beauty and all this shit. I see people talking about fighting for righteousness, like the Ramayana and the all these great stories. And then you see people living as slaves to British imperialism. You see all these contradictions. And then you come to the United States. I came here in 1970. This very traditional Indian family lands in Paterson, New Jersey. Have you been to Paterson? This is in 1970. You have sex, drugs, and rock and roll taking place. You have the Vietnam War. You turn on the TV, you're seeing people get shot, and killed. You see drugs all around you. And then you have this very humble Indian family living in a home where we didn't even have heat, where we had to go get coal to put it in because our landlord wouldn't give us heat, right? In America, which is supposed to be the land of the plenty, right? So
back then, did you think did you dream of running for president one day?
No, but what happened to me was I came here in 1970, 1975, when my grandmother was dying, me and my mom went back to India. And that is when I realized, oh my God, like I had
79, you said, so you were like 16 or 17 years old?
No, I was 12. So I came here when I was 7. So at age 12, I go back to India.
Okay.
And I realized, oh my God, my grandparents have no shoes. There's no running water. And, I see this massive contradiction. And then realizing that in 24 hours, I'll be back in the United States where I have all this stuff. You see what I'm saying? So that is when I realized that I better do something with my life, because I would have access to all of this. Here, my great-grandfather was an indentured servant. My grandparents, I think they went to 2nd grade. Maybe one of them didn't even go to school. Like how much they had suffered that my parents could get out of India, you see? So I started really having this very deep reflection of what was my role, you see? This deep sense of service. And I started to learn how to meditate. My great-grandfather, and started realizing that there had to be a purpose to life at a deep level, and that life was really about service. And with that, so as a 12-year-old, I came back and I said, shit, I better do something, because I'm going to have all these opportunities in a plane ride that these people can never imagine. And it didn't make sense that my aunt was living in a little 10-foot by 10-foot hut.
Right.
Like this is fucked up. Like just as a child, this didn't seem just, you see?
Yeah, of course. So
I decided that I better figure this shit out. Like I wanted to figure out why there were these contradictions in the world. And that decision, and I still remember that moment that put me, I was my grandparents came to see me at this old caboose train as we were leaving. I was crying, they were crying, and I realized these are the most loving people I've ever met in my life, and they have such a deep reverence for what you would call God, everything, that this is fucked up, that I'm going to get all this opportunity and they have to stay here, live in this very, very unfortunate life materially, you see? So that set me on that journey to say, I better do something. And I made a promise that I would figure this shit out. And that's what brings me to that book, System and Revolution. I did figure it out. I have cracked the code, and it's quite, it's a very interesting place to be, because now we have created a curriculum. We've taught, 500 million people know about our movement. When we add up all the unique video views, in 2020, about 200 million people saw my video on vitamin D3 before it was removed. Now, in 2020, I was the one who called out the pandemic right on the money. I was the one who said this is about the immune system. Booby fucking Kennedy was promoting lockdowns. So was Trump. You know, what's her name? Marla Maples reached out to me. She goes, you know, me and Tiffany, we think you're awesome. We love you, you know, so much. We've seen all your videos. And, you know, we're the ones who started the Fire Fauci campaign. You go look at 2020, man. I wasn't just speaking truth, but I was acting truth, living truth, doing truth. We created the Fire Fauci campaign. We took 120,000 signatures to Trump. You know, I spoke to the White House. Marla took my letter to Trump and said, don't fucking lock down this economy. I said, you don't need to lock it down. You can take those people who seriously have pre-existing conditions, fine, quarantine them. But the rest of people, put them on vitamin D3, quercetin, and zinc. Zelenko took my stuff and started selling this shit, you know? But we did the noble deeds we said the right thing at the right time to mobilize people. We didn't get paid anything. You know, I maybe got 3 hours sleep in 2020 to 2021 a day. We're the ones who exposed the backdoor portal into Twitter. You know, so I was in the center of all of this. So, you know, when you look at someone like Elon Musk and Netanyahu, I know who these fucking people are. Because when I was thrown off Twitter for exposing the backdoor portal into Twitter, you've probably seen my diagram on winbackfreedom.com. My lawsuit, which I represented myself in federal court, it was in September of 2020 when they stole the election from me. This was before Trump. I was the one who exposed how the machine votes can be flipped, how signature verification is screwed up. That's when Mark Meadows and Trump and all these people called me. They wanted me to help them with 2020, but they had no interest in really changing it. They used the election fraud stuff to just raise money. They didn't want to solve it. Mike Lindell would send his airplane here, fly me everywhere. Mike just was selling fucking pillows, talking about election fraud. So I was in the center of all of this. So you're talking to someone who lived and breathed and was in the trenches. This is not some grift. So I know what these people did not do.
Yeah.
So in 2020, I was a guy, the MIT PhD, who could have just shut his mouth up like many of these doctors did. I exposed the pandemic for what it was. I exposed the election fraud. I was the one who exposed the backdoor portal into Twitter. I filed the lawsuit on my own, took on the government long before Fucker Carlson, and Fucker Carlson concealed my lawsuit because he's part of the deep state. And this is what people need to understand. So when you look at Elon Musk right now, which is the topic that I really wanted to get into, is
please do actually. Yeah, go ahead. I'd love to hear your
brought in. Yeah. I mean, where Elon Musk begins and where government ends, nobody knows.
Right.
$6 billion he got for SpaceX. He's never built fucking rockets. Every fucking business he's done has failed. X that he did, you know, if it wasn't for Peter Thiel, his shit would have been worth anything. So he is an agent who's projected to the world as some great innovator. SpaceX is the government largest. You know, Tesla was already done. He basically ousted the two founders, redid the paperwork to make himself look like a founder, okay? And then Twitter is wholly exists because of Section 230 immunity by the government. But what I uncovered in my lawsuit in 2020 is the government has created this massive infrastructure to every social media company so they could surveil and spy on all of us. Jack Dorsey and Vijay Gadde at Twitter were the obvious establishment. You see, they were too obvious in their fascism. Because when I exposed the fact that the government deleted ballot images of my election, that started going viral on Twitter. It was the government of Massachusetts which contacted Twitter to shut me down. In the lawsuit through cross-examination, it was I who uncovered that the government has a backdoor portal into Twitter. We wrote to Tucker Carlson, do something, nothing. Him and Glenn Greenwald concealed my lawsuit. You know why? Because I'm independent. I'm not in their little bougie clubs. Giving me the limelight would have diminished them. But more importantly, if what I had uncovered was exposed in 2020, we would have solved a lot of this. They're part of the deep state. So
do you think they're aware of it?
Yeah, of course.
Or are they like useful idiots? Okay.
No. They're fully aware of it. Go look at Tucker Carlson's entire history. And we can do a whole show on that. But
I mean, like all these guys, like Elon's aware of it. Like,
of course.
Okay. How do you distinguish between someone who is aware of it and complicit and someone who just needs to be woken up.
Well, let's follow Elon Musk all the way through, okay?
Sure, sure.
So you can study Musk's history on your own, and you will recognize that he is wholly owned. He's a slave of government. Okay, you don't just suddenly put all these Starlink satellites in the in space, right?
So, Dr. Shiva, is China in on it then? Like are China? Is the Chinese government and the American deep state like working in? Is that your view on this?
Well, I think what you have to think about it. Go watch the Swarm video again. Watch it a few more times. You have to recognize that the Swarm is a set. It's a distributed, multiracial aristocracy. They're fighting the Chinese elites and the U.S. elites and the Russian elites from time to time may have some disagreements, okay? But ultimately, they want to make sure in all their countries, the working people, are frightened and they stay aligned, to what they need to get done. That's a key thing. So, it's the age-old story. Someone running this country thinks that people are going to rise up against them. They'll start a war with another nation, right? It's just standard, okay? But the thing to recognize is that among the strata of elites who are essentially monopolizing capital, monopolizing resources, to the extent that Elon Musk and China have an agreement, that should not be, that surprising, right? Because they have certain class interests, no different than Putin and China do.
I guess right? It would just imply, right? Like if he's owned by the American government, and obviously he can't say anything. He cannot say anything bad about China. Like he depends very heavily upon China.
Well, it's not even Elon Musk. How many lobbyists are owned by China? John Boehner now is a lobbyist for China, who was the former head of the Speaker of the United States. Okay, yeah. So I think the key thing people need to understand is that this is a strata of people, the Swarm, that moves capital among themselves. Right. To the extent that they need to blame another country, it's to basically mobilize working class people to go fight them or to divide working people across the world.
It's a global, like this Swarm is a global.
Of course. I mean, they all go to the same parties. They all go to the same clubs.
And they're aware, like, is there a line somewhere? Like you said that at least some of these people know that they're in it. Are you initiated into it? Is there like a, eyes wide shut situation?
I don't look. I mean, look, some
people call it the cabal,
well, I think the problem is when we try to make it put it in a box, we lose the nuances and the sophistication of how this works, right? 40% of the,
I guess I'm asking, is it like something these people are consciously doing and like they're aware of it, or is it like an emergent property?
Yeah, it's an emergent property, right? It's an emergent property, okay? But you can see if you go to Harvard, right? 40% of the admissions to Harvard are legacy admissions. Yep. Now, you're a Saudi Arabian sheikh, you have kids, you send them to Harvard. You're some Ambani in India, you send your kids to Harvard. You're some, Hollywood mogul, you send your kids to Harvard, right? This is how it works. Booby fucking Kennedy openly says, oh, I never had to apply. I just wrote the name Kennedy and they let me in. So what is Harvard? It's a club, right? It's a club. Is it like you go through some cabal and no, it's an understanding. Okay. You play at the same golf courses. Your fathers know each other. Your mother's friend hangs out with the person who's in admissions office. You see, it's much more free flowing, but not anyone gets access to that, right? So, for example, there's a restaurant. I don't know if you've been to California, Malibu, when I used to live out there.
Sure.
Because I used to live out in Hollywood. There's a club called Nobu.
Yeah.
And there's a VIP area. Huh?
I've been to Nobu in Newport, not in Malibu.
Well, but if you go to the one on Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu, there's a VIP section. So all the same people come there. Okay. Yeah. So
it's very overrated, by the way.
Right. But what I'm saying is it's an understanding. Okay.
Can I ask you, are you familiar with cybernetics? Because systems theory. Do you know about cybernetics? Have you studied that?
Yeah. Yes. My PhD work was called information cybernetics.
Really? Okay. Because I feel like, I'm not super well read on it, but a lot of what you say seems like it's got some kind of foundation in that. I don't know, is it a theory? I guess it's a field of systems
No,
theory, right?
cybernetics really came about, but before we go there, I just want to finish this
Please,
saying,
yeah, go ahead.
aligned with Elon Musk.
Mhm.
So the key thing we need to recognize is Musk is wholly owned by the government.
Mm.
When the pandemic occurred, that's when his wealth went up to 200 billion. He became the most wealthiest guy. 600 billionaires increased their wealth to 2.3 trillion.
Mm.
And but all these quote unquote MAGA conservatives, when Musk took over Twitter, they immediately said, "Oh my God, I'm going to pray to Musk is awesome. Now we're going to have free speech." In December 22, when I was put back on Twitter, the first tweet I put out was, "Elon, you're looking for a CEO. You know, I'm the guy who invented email. I have 4 degrees from MIT. Why don't you make me your CEO?" And it was like a test that I put out, right? That tweet got close to 50 million views. You can go look at it. It's still out there. It skyrocketed. Okay. It's quite extraordinary. Okay. The next day, I said, "Elon, are you going to remove the backdoor portal to Twitter that still exists that came out of my lawsuit? Here's all the information." And then you can see from that day, January, February, March, my viewership went from about 1 million views per day down to 10,000 views per day. And I tracked it like that. Okay. So you have all these conservatives bowing down to Musk, everyone kissing his ass, thinking he's going to deliver free speech. And I said, this guy's not the proponent of free speech, because he openly said free speech does not equal free reach, which is completely against the framers of the Constitution, who believe free speech equals free reach. That's why they created something called the US Postal Service. All right. So what I realized was Musk was brought in by the swarm because they knew that I had uncovered the backdoor portal into Twitter. It was out everywhere. And they had to now create a new story. And that story was, oh yeah, oh my God, with Twitter files. Yes, we uncovered this backdoor portal. But it is called a limited hangout, which is a CIA technique. When someone, an independent person, figures out what they're up to, they can't deny it. So they release a little piece of the story. The limited hangout concept came out in the Nixon tapes, where Nixon said, "Let's do a limited hangout of the burglary," because they were going to.
This is what they're doing with the Epstein
everything.
files and like just giving you a little bit that doesn't really matter. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they bring in these characters. They push them, Schellenberger, Mike Benz, all these fools who are nowhere to be found in 2020. Okay.
Yeah.
And they make them heroes. So they have this down to an art now, Justice, right? They have this down to an art where they know that an independent agent like me, we cannot give him the limelight, but we can't throw him off Twitter because it's going to justify his position. So they put me back on Twitter with 329,000 followers. And for 2 years, none of my followers ever grow. Same on Facebook, 542,000 followers. Now, I have filed my new lawsuit against CISA, Musk, Elon Musk. We just served them last week to show that my running for president, they're doing censorship 10.0. That's what Musk is doing.
Yep.
So they put guys like me on, and they make sure that you track all my followers. And I know the math behind this. You can take all my followers, and then you can figure out, oh, we can create a signal of who are the people. It's called a feature vector. Who are the other people who follow Dr. Shiva? Now you have a mathematical analysis. It's pretty easy to do. Then you can use that as a filter to find everyone else on Twitter
that looks like
who may follow Dr. Shiva. And you know what you do? You send them notifications for Booby Kennedy. That's what's going on. So they're taking people who would naturally come to me and diverting them to the not so obvious establishment. It's quite powerful. And that's what I've asserted in my lawsuit. It's censorship 10.0. So Musk thinks he's very clever. The Silicon Valley elites are the ones who put Musk in. The same Silicon Valley elites who invested in Twitter, they didn't want valuation to go down. So they bring in Musk to be like the doofus, bullshit genius. Oh, he's fighting for free speech. That was just to give a cover. But the reality is that you have censorship 10.0. And that's what's really going on. So, there's a second book I wrote called Future of Email. When you get it, you should read it. But in the book, I really talk about the fact that the elites, a system cannot survive with two properties, controllability and observability. This comes out of cybernetic theory. You have to be able to control it, but before you can control it, you have to be able to observe it. So now with social media, we have infinite capability to do surveillance. They have so much data now. You saw Facebook sold all their direct marketing messages to Netflix because they can do predictive analytics. In turn, Netflix sold all their video viewing data to Facebook. So the amount of data, again, in that mechanistic world that we have, using this data, we can pretty much figure out the trajectory of an object, assuming that object behaves like an automaton, okay? So that's where we're at right now. We're at this place where the elites have infinite observability and infinite controllability. And with this observability and controllability, you can move people. Okay, shit, Dr. Shiva's Truth, Freedom, and Health movement is fucking exposing Tucker. Like he's really ripping these people apart. So they're going to bring them all together. So you have Joe Rogan interviewing Fucker Carlson. Suddenly Fucker Carlson is talking about aliens and spiritual beings. And 9/11, well, 20 years later. Okay? So you notice Fucker Carlson never talks about anything when it matters. He never talked about the backdoor portal to Twitter that I discovered when it mattered. He never talked about election fraud when it mattered. But now all these stupid magatards are like, oh my God, Tucker's revealing the truth. He's our savior. Fucking idiots. If you look at his tweet, go look at his, you know how you can search someone's tweets? Go look at if he ever even uses the word Zionism. Not once. What is the most important issue of our time right now?
Dr. Shiva, I got to ask you though.
I have about a couple of minutes.
Okay. Well, we can wrap it. I would love to have you back on. I would love to sit down in person and do this in person sometime. I would come to Boston. Be happy to do something like that if you're up for it. How about this? Why don't you take a couple minutes or however long and just plug anything you want? Shameless self-promotion. Floor is yours, and then I'll let you go, and I'll close it up here.
Yeah, Trey, if you're listening, you can put some of this stuff up, and we'll finish up a video on our end. But the first thing is that my run for president is quite historic, because someone like me should never even be running for president. B, shouldn't have ever even gotten 500 million people throughout the world knowing about us. Our movement now has about 500,000 people. And what is this movement? Well, the manifestation of the movement in the United States is, Shiva for president, okay? But that movement is best represented by this little bumper sticker, Truth, Freedom, Health. By the way, the words truth, freedom, and health, justice are not just a slogan. They directly relate to fundamentals. You can call it spiritual theory, systems theory, everything. Freedom is the definition of motion, transport, the Vata principle that comes out of yogic science. Truth is really a process. It's a process of taking all sorts of ideas in an open society, applying scientific method, and coming to truth. And truth keeps getting refined over time, right? Health is a vessel through which truth and freedom operate. In the Indian system, it was called Kapha principle. In the principle of cybernetics and systems theory, it's called the structure principle. So our movement, Truth, Freedom, Health, the manifestation is someone like me running. So everyone out there, go to shivaforpresident.com and get one of these bumper stickers. Because I'm the only presidential candidate who does not suck Zionist cock. And that is a very, very important thing that everyone needs to understand. It is probably one of the most defining things. And why do I say that? What may seem vitriolic, right? Because we're talking about Zionism, which is right now in the modern world, right now it's occurring, is the ultimate manifestation of anything that's anti-human and anti-American. It says it legitimizes 0.0001% of people are the chosen people that can rule over other people. No different than Indian Brahmanism, which said the small set of people are better than everyone else. No different than Nazism. So never has there been a candidate like me who will openly speak out against Zionism and who's running for president. And the level, as Cynthia McKinney, I don't know if you know, she ran for Congress, she said, Dr. Shiva and I'm paraphrasing her, he goes, the level of abuse he has taken and the level of invisibility they attempt to do tells me that he is where I should be. So if you are an American and you love this country, you have to recognize that one of you is finally running for president, one of us. And so go get one of these bumper stickers, okay? And why do I say this bumper sticker? Because it's a very simple way, the lazy man's way. You got to peel it and you got to put it on the back of your windshield. And most people get these and they're afraid to put a bumper sticker on their car. But it's a bold move because your neighbor is going to say, who is that guy? Tell me more. Why aren't you putting a Trump sticker? Why aren't you supporting Biden? And then you will have to have this conversation, which will be very, very valuable. So go to Shiva for president and do that. The second thing is for those of you who really want to raise your consciousness, go to truthfreedomhealth.com. And it's taken me around 50 years to take all this knowledge. You know, Justice, you pointed this out. What I believe there's a God-given talent I have is to take very complex information and make it accessible. And that's what I've done. So I can take cybernetic theory and I can teach it to a hairdresser who can then teach it to a PhD. And that's literally what we're doing. Learn, teach, and serve. That's our model. Because if you're going to fundamentally change the world or build a movement, if you're going to build an iPhone, you better know a lot of physics. You better know electromagnetism. You better know material science. So a lot of people very naively think, oh, we're going to build a movement to shatter the swarm. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, what I've uncovered is a physics of how to do that. And that is manifested in the movement for Truth, Freedom, Health, which is now a global movement. So we make it accessible for everyone to become a warrior scholar. You see, in the ancient Indian traditions or the ancient spiritual traditions, even Christianity or Hinduism, the warrior spirit and the healer were one. They were the same. You fought against evil, and at the same time, you healed the world. Saint Michael, you know, the Archangel Michael represents both attributes. Murugan, who is one of the deities in the Indian culture, represents both. So if you truly want to heal yourself, you know, and you truly want to change the world, you got to go to truthfreedomhealth.com and learn this. Otherwise, you're gonna follow Fucker Carlson one day. You're gonna think Trump's your savior. You're gonna think Booby Kennedy. Another day, you're gonna vote for Obama. Another day, you're gonna vote for Bernie Sanders. And by the way, all those people I've said, Trumpers move among all those. Because the American white working class in particular, and the working class in general in the United States, the American working class has been one of the most subjugated working classes because the elites, the global elites, know that the American working class has the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and the Bill of Rights. And they have to make them fat, dumb, and happy so they don't exercise them. And that's the arc of history that's taken place, particularly since 1960, 1970 till today. And that's what we're experiencing. And Trump, Booby Kennedy, Biden are the manifestation of all of that. They all suck Zionist cock, all of them. I'm the first presidential candidate who will not suck Zionist cock and will use those words and is educating people on why you should curse at these people. And you should not feel embarrassed to curse at them. This is a very good thing. But at the same time, on the other extreme, we're also educating people with great sophistication on why we need to build a bottoms-up movement. And that's what's going on. So if you're serious about changing the world, but more importantly, raising your own consciousness, support our campaign, Shiva for President. Help us get signatures on the ground and go to truthfreedomhealth.com. That's what you can do for yourself, particularly yourself. And the last piece everyone needs to recognize is ultimately you have to connect your journey, your suffering, with the collective journey and the suffering. And that, to me, is where enlightenment comes, where you connect your individual. You can't forget your individuality, but you have to connect it to the collective and us mobilizing ourselves bottoms up. But that's what Truth, Freedom, Health is about. And that's what our run for president's about. All the policy things that come out of that core. This is why we can say, from the foreign policy perspective, we must stop funding Israel. First item, we must make sure no one can be dual citizens of Israel and the United States. It doesn't make any sense. And if anyone we're going to fund militarily, it should be the Palestinian people. I'm not talking Hamas. Hamas was created by Israel. I'm talking about the United States wants to stand by its virtues. We should be protecting and funding, giving military aid to the Palestinian people. And so that's a manifestation when you take a systems approach. When you take a systems approach, you realize that if we want to take care of our health, it's about the right medicine for the right person at the right time. The modern healthcare system is not about that. It's about one size fits all medicine. So the policies that we have are based on personalized health, you see? And you can keep going on every policy. When 2020, I was the one who saved hundreds of millions of people's lives. I know that. I get emails every day. We're the ones who said it's not about pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine. It's about you building a strong immune system. And then we gave people protocols. We did many, many videos. So the pro-vax, anti-vax argument puts people into two camps. But when you take the argument of building resilient systems, which is what system science reveals, you get to a different point where we can unite to realize that all the policies that have taken place since 1970 has been to destroy your immune system. This is why today, the lifespan of the United States is going downwards. If you have a child, your child's lifespan will be shorter than yours. And this is not because of the quote unquote vaccine. It's a policy that has been done since 1960, 1970, that has created massive income inequality, massive stress, the junk in the environment. It's a whole bunch of things. And this is why we need a systems overhaul. That's it, Justice.
Dr. Shiva, thank you.
Share this with your audience, man.
Thank you for coming on. Would love to have another conversation in the future. It's been really a lot of fun and very interesting.
Yeah, everyone, be well, man.
Thank you.
Yeah,
so,
I'm gonna check out of here. I'm just gonna go back to my StreamYard. Trey, if you're listening, if you could just play the video for president, that'd be great. And actually, Trey, I'm gonna come back. Thanks, Justice. Be well. Best to you and your audience.
Likewise. God bless. Wow.
So this is Dr. Shiva. I hope that was valuable. But the bottom line is, in the discussion I just had with Justice, everyone recognized that Elon Musk is the not so obvious establishment. He is a total proponent of censorship. He just retweeted Netanyahu saying that the world should go and, go after all these students at universities. And that's what they're doing. Elon Musk is pro-censorship. He's not for free speech. Neither is Netanyahu. And the only force that's fighting right now for the world, for us, is our campaign and our movement for truth, freedom, health. So the way you can support us, go to Shiva for President. Get these bumper stickers. Donate if you want. But when you donate, I give you lots of books and support so you can learn, so you can become a warrior scholar. Do that. And then finally, become a truth, freedom, health warrior scholar. Those are the ways that you support yourself and everything that we're doing. I'm going to finish up by playing our video here that will really clinch it for you on why everyone should get involved in supporting our campaign for president.
Who would have ever thought I'd be running for president of the United States of America? I was born a low-caste untouchable in India's caste system, a system of aristocracy, oppression, and racism. My name is Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. I'm an MIT PhD, a Fulbright scholar, a scientist, engineer, entrepreneur, and inventor. My family and I left India to come to America on my 7th birthday. I grew up in the working-class neighborhoods of New Jersey, playing baseball, mowing lawns, painting houses, and coding software. My friends and neighbors are blacks, Italians, Irish, people of all races. As a 14-year-old, I wrote 50,000 lines of software code to create the world's first email system, and was awarded the first U.S. copyright for email, recognizing me as its official inventor at a time when copyright was the only way to protect software inventions. I did that long before I ever came to MIT, revealing that big innovations can occur anytime, any place, by anybody. Growing up, I saw politicians dividing us by race and religion in both America and India, to have us fighting each other while they remained safe in their gated communities and in their playgrounds of Hollywood, Martha's Vineyard, and Silicon Valley. I'm a fighter. I fought racism and exposed their imperialist wars, fought for workers, and put my life on the line against global corruption. I never wanted to run for political office. All that changed when I saw working Americans as never before being duped by the establishment and the not-so-obvious establishment. Across left and right, we were being sold out and made to forget why we came to America and why America existed. Lawyers, academics, billionaires, celebrities, and politicians, elites, Clintons, Kennedys, Bidens, Obamas, Bushes, black and white, have hijacked America. They printed trillions for their friends. They delivered crumbling infrastructure, corruption, and racism. They've transferred trillions to themselves, dividing black and white, fear-mongering, and fake science. Lockdowns and censorship, dirty air, food, and water, pushing drugs upon us, making us sicker. We've been sold out. One set of rules for them and another for us. We deserve a warrior with a history of courage in putting everything on the line for you, who believes in you, not them, who has created a movement bottoms up for truth, freedom, health. I've exposed their lies at the right time, never waiting until it was popular. I've exposed their false gods who exist to lead you back to them. I've exposed their fake science of lockdowns and masking and provided you solutions to fight them and win and protect your immune system, saving millions. I exposed Fauci, galvanized the Fire Fauci campaign when others remained silent. When they stole our election, we sued the government and Twitter in our historic 2020 federal lawsuit, exposing in bare view the government and big tech censorship infrastructure, the unholy alliance between government and social media companies. Where was Elon and his grifters? They stood by the sidelines and did nothing. They did not use their megaphones to help us when it could have made a big difference. Now our movement grows for truth, freedom, health, independent of all of them. Every day millions are learning the science of systems, the knowledge the elites do not want you to have, so you may learn how to think, stand up, and fight, independent of the establishment of left and right and their fake heroes. Now it's time for you to join the movement, to win back America, to win back truth, win back freedom, win back your health. That's why I'm running for President of the United States. This race is about you. This race is about truth, freedom, health versus power, profit, control. We've had enough. They think we'll fall in line and vote again for their lawyers, celebrities, billionaires, and chosen ones from above. We choose our heroes from below, from the rank and file, who do what is right at the right time, not when it's convenient and popular. They can never represent us. What America needs is a movement by the working people, for the working people, who are educated, organized, decentralized, and fight for independence from their systems of control. And that movement exists. It's ready for you. We don't need them. We need us to go bottoms up, neighbor to neighbor. My journey, your journey are all the same. It's our time. It's time we had one of us. It's time to win back truth, freedom, health, to win back America. Be part of this historic movement, all the way to our victory on November 5th, 2024. If you're an American citizen, pledge your vote now for Dr. Shiva, the independent candidate for U.S. President. No matter where you live, you can be a part of this. Volunteer as little as 20 minutes a day. Don't delay. This is Dr. Shiva, and I approve this message, paid for by Dr. Shiva for President.
All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed that. We had a sort of a wide-ranging discussion with Justice. Everyone get involved in our movement. This is your movement. Go to Shiva for President, volunteer, donate, support it, and get involved and become a Truth, Freedom, Health Warrior Scholar if you truly want to play the long game and fundamentally be an agent of change. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I wish you well to you and your family.
We need to build a bottoms-up movement. Go to ShivaForPresident.com and volunteer.